On paper, Missouri and Kansas being on College Game Day makes a ton of sense this season, but I hate to tell you, it's not going to happen.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And on today's program, I'm going to talk a lot about expectations for Mizzou football, not only 2025, but also the future. And regardless of the Bill Laurie part of Dennis Gates hiring Tim Fuller, this is a move that shows that Dennis Gates is not messing around whatsoever. He is going all in, and I frankly love that. But you know what, before we start the program, I do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and as always during the NBA playoffs, this is the best time to be with FanDuel, and right now new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. But you know what, let's talk about something that I've seen a lot of Missouri fans contemplating here the last month or so. And that is week 2, of course, of this 2025 season. As I'm sure you're aware, for the first time in 14 years, Missouri and Kansas will play a tackle football game. That should be a fantastic time, assuming Missouri wins. A Missouri loss would, of course, be catastrophic, not only from a rivalry perspective, but quite honestly, week 2, just like in 2023 against Kansas State, I think this game is going to set the tone for the rest of the season. But with such an historical rivalry coming back, of course, you might think, hey, ESPN, what's up? Maybe College Game Day coming to Columbia for the first time in 15 years since Missouri and Oklahoma. Obviously it squared off and Missouri beat number 1 Oklahoma that season. But I hate to tell you, I don't think there's any chance it's going to happen. Now, let's look at the slate here really quickly because, you know, there's not a ton of marquee matchups in week 2 just in terms of pure volume. Let's look at it here really quickly. How about Ole Miss and Kentucky, a rematch of a game that Kentucky won last year and frankly knocked the Rebels out of college football playoff contention in retrospect there. You've also got Oklahoma State and Oregon, which is a fairly interesting cross-conference game. You know, I saw Josh Pate actually put Illinois at Duke on his possibilities here for game day without mentioning Missouri and Kansas. I gotta say, didn't have that one on the old bingo card, as much as I hate to use that cliche. But right now, by the way, it's not just, of course, College Game Day, but Missouri, in theory, could be on Big Noon as well, I suppose. Or actually, more precisely, I should say that the Big Noon factor could actually end up helping Missouri here, at least in theory. But here's the problem. You see, in fact, the biggest game of that day, if it's not Missouri and Kansas, well, it's got to be Michigan and Oklahoma. Now, here's the deal. Of course, you got two historic blue blood programs there, without a doubt. And for as much as I've sort of downplayed the importance of being a blue blood in terms of recruiting these days, it's not quite what it used to be. Well, in terms of eyeballs, that's definitely going to move the needle. So I don't think there's any doubt that anybody would have Oklahoma and Michigan ahead of Missouri and Kansas. I hate to say it. But then you might be thinking, wait a second, what if Big Noon selects Michigan and Oklahoma? What if the Fox side of it, who has a relationship with the Big Ten, decides, hey, wait a second, this is our game? Well, without getting into all of the vagaries of contracts and TV negotiations and all this, well, I've been able to find out that Michigan and Oklahoma is going to be on ABC. So I will bet every dollar that I have, seriously, that Michigan and Oklahoma will be game day, especially in a scenario where Iowa and Iowa State, it has already been announced that that interstate rivalry is going to be the Big Noon game. So at first I thought, maybe Big Noon here will bail Missouri and Kansas out and they'll get on College Game Day, but Folks, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. That is simply not going to happen. Michigan and Oklahoma is a lock for game day in week 2. But speaking of course, of the 2025 Mizzou football team, I'm starting to think I'm maybe underestimating the Tigers for this upcoming season. Well, for a few reasons. Number one, I think I'm looking to 2026 as maybe the chance for a bigger year for Missouri. But again, if my premise here is that the Tigers offense is the question mark here, hey, quarterback, obviously, offensive tackle, I think are the two biggest question marks to say the least. Well, I do have to remind myself that last season's Missouri offense wasn't great all the time. So the expectations there, maybe I need to reset myself a little bit, because let's keep in mind that the Missouri offense truly did struggle quite a bit at different times last season. Hey, they had some really good moments too, and especially the South Carolina game, putting up points against a really good Gamecock defense. Also, the bowl game, I thought when Missouri and Brady Cook in particular was able to heal up from some of his various ailments from the season, I thought the offense looked like a different unit, even without Luther Burden III in there. But again, if Eli Drinkwitz is right, and I don't have any reason to believe that he's, lying or anything. Of course, time will tell how correct his thoughts are here, but Drinkwitz thinks that this is as good of a roster, maybe the most talented roster he's ever had at Missouri. Now, of course, not all positions are created equally, and that's where I struggle a little bit, because for as high as I am on Bo Pribula's potential as a quarterback, and hey, Sam Horn has still got plenty of talent too, so if you're going to throw his name at me, fine. I'm saying both guys have definite upside, but being the unknown that they are, and knowing what I know about reps and experience being so important, especially at the quarterback position, it just makes me hesitate a little bit, especially when Pribula may or may not have great pass protection. I simply don't know. I think I know that Pribula is willing to hang in the pocket and let plays develop. We'll see if that ends up being both a plus and maybe a problem at times as well, because what you don't want to do as a quarterback, you want to let the play develop, but there's obviously a balance between that and holding on to the ball too long and taking unnecessary sacks. Speaking of the Oklahoma Sooners, my colleague John Williams just correctly pointed out in our group chat that, ladies and gentlemen, sacks is actually a quarterback stat. It's much more on the quarterback than I think people realize, whereas the running game, it's actually the opposite. Whereas that's much more on the offensive line than the running back than people realize. But regardless, Missouri, 2025, 7.5 right now over at FanDuel is their total. I'm thinking that's pretty conservative at this point. I think 8 wins, I think that's a pretty good way to go if you're a Missouri fan at this point, because 8 wins in the regular season would almost feel like, okay, cool, good job, guys. I don't think we'd be slapping each other on the backs or anything like that. That just shows you where the expectation level is for Mizzou football right now. And speaking of erstwhile Missouri rivals from the old Big 8 and Big 12 days, well, I love making fun of the Nebraska Cornhuskers as much as anybody, but I have to admit, even though Missouri has been pretty clearly the better program for the last decade or so, I got to say there is still something about Nebraska that Missouri should strive toward. So I'm gonna get into that here in just a minute. But first, let's talk about the FanDuel, where, yes, this time of year, it's the NBA playoffs. In fact, the NBA finals are here, and FanDuel is obviously the best place to get in on all the action. And FanDuel makes it so easy to stay in on all the action, either before the tip-off or live, by the way. So, if you're thinking that the Indiana Pacers have a chance, well, you got a pretty good bunch of odds. At last check, plus 530 were the Indiana Pacers. I would point out that no team, there's been 2 teams, I believe, in history that have been 200 plus or more in the finals, so significant 2-1 type underdogs. It's only happened twice that those type of teams have actually won the championship. So, keep all of that in mind. Regardless, if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. So Matt, over in the old YouTube comments, asks, what is the expectation at Mizzou? That's always my question. Are you really expecting to win the Southeastern Conference and compete for a national championship? Or are you just happy with a top 5 SEC finish? Or is just a winning record and a decent bowl game the expectation? Well, Matt, this is a good question. Of course, from fan to fan, that is going to vary. But to me, it's a constantly moving target. And I would say it depends on the season. I mean, if you're talking about when Eli Drinkwitz first showed up to Missouri, well, obviously the expectation level has been raised quite a bit here just in about 5 years or so. So the point here is that, again, constantly moving target, and where you want that target moving is obviously in the upward direction. That's the long-term goal, of course, is to keep raising your fans' expectations. Simply put, that means you're doing well on the football field, and it does at a certain point sort of becomes a positive, self-fulfilling prophecy. And I will say, take Nebraska fans. I brought up the Huskers before this. Well, obviously Nebraska fans have become arguably quite unrealistic in their expectations. But you know why they have unrealistic expectations? Because in the past, Nebraska won, and they won big. And yes, it's been a long, long time since Nebraska has been in that particular discussion. But again, there is a reason for it. And as much as I, again, love to make fun of the Husker fans and their unrealistic expectations at this point, in my opinion, Missouri should strive to have fans with that level of unrealistic expectations. That means that Eli Drinkwitz in the program is doing something right. I have to say one thing I was just sort of randomly thinking about the other day. Thinking about Eli Drinkwitz, yes, as I often do, but for all of the nerd talk about Eli Drinkwitz, yes, the glasses, he's not the tallest guy in the world. I understand all of that. But for all of that talk, I have to say Eli Drinkwitz, to me, does not pour off 1 ounce of beta energy. In fact, I'd say Eli Drinkwitz is an alpha. And this is I'm telling you this as somebody, technically he and I met when he first became Missouri's football coach a few years ago. I promise you he does not remember this. I remember it. I promise you he doesn't, whether he knows who I am or not. I promise you he would not remember meeting me. But he and I have been in the same spot a few handful of times, nod here, there, whatever. I'm just saying, despite the fact that I am, for all practical purposes, I'm like a foot taller than Eli Drinkwitz. I'm also a few months older than he is too, even though we are basically the same age. But despite that physical dynamic, there is no doubt that when I've been in the same presence with Eli Drinkwitz, he's the alpha, not me. Okay? Let's just be really, really clear about this. Now, physically, is that the case? Well, obviously not. But personality-wise, I mean, the guy just oozes confidence. It's really impressive, honestly. And honestly, is that a surprise? Because how do you think somebody like Eli Drinkwitz, who maybe doesn't fit the physical mold, he's probably heard about that his entire life, and he didn't come from, some massive football family. He wasn't a great college. He didn't play college football. And so how did he get from there, being the football nerd, I guess you could say, to now being an SEC football coach at a program that he is elevated, by the way? How is he able to do that? It certainly wasn't by being a wallflower. It certainly wasn't by being a beta male. So for all this nerd talk, to me, that's just kind of surface level analysis, in my opinion, and really not all that interesting. So Alpha Drinkwitz, mark it down. And of course, one of the ways Eli Drinkwitz has raised the level of Missouri football is with high school recruiting. And while certainly the portal has taken up a bunch of our mind share, and not just ours as fans, but the program as well, well, there's still some really important true freshmen on this 2025 Missouri football team. And all the buzz that I'm hearing from all the different places that I read, people that I talk to, is that the edge rusher Javion Hilson and also the wide receiver Donovan Olugbode are two guys that are almost certain to see the field as true freshmen. I think Shaun Terry, this is something I've been on for months now, quite honestly, but I saw Gabe DeArmond over at Power Mizzou mention the possibility too. I think there's a really strong chance that Shaun Terry could be your punt returner this fall. He is an explosive athlete. His high school tape is kind of insane to watch, honestly. I'm just frankly not sure how polished he is as an actual receiver. But day one, I think the explosiveness of him as an athlete, I think he can play as a punt returner immediately. It's something he did in high school, something he's very good and comfortable with. I think it makes a ton of sense as long as you feel good about his hands, which to me, even more so than being an explosive playmaker, just simply securing the punt, especially in today's college football where fewer and fewer punts are being returned. That's the most important thing. Catch the freaking ball. You've gotten a stop on defense. The last thing you want to do is give the ball back to the offense with a muff, especially when you add on the field position loss there as well of about 40 yards or so. So to me, Shaun Terry, as long as he can simply receive the ball, and it sure seems like based on his high school resume, he can, I think he's kind of your ideal punt returner next year for the Tigers. He's that explosive. And since I've talked quite a bit about expectations for Missouri football today, let's talk about the expectations for Mizzou basketball next season, where I think Mizzou fans are a lot lower on this upcoming squad than the nation is. Let's talk about that after these quick words. You know, about a year or so ago, I promised after the whole Jonte Porter gambling debacle, I said I was done talking about the Porters on the Locked On Mizzou podcast. Well, the joke is on me. Once Javon Porter was brought into the fold by Dennis Gates, well, obviously that promise is one I'm going to have to break and have many times already since. But speaking of Javon Porter, I think he was part of the problem, if you will, in terms of perception for Missouri this time around in the transfer portal. I think Missouri did so well, I think, in the previous really couple times, if you want to go back and look at it. In retrospect, Tamar Bates and Caleb Grill alone from a couple of years ago was a heck of an addition in the transfer portal, despite all of Missouri's struggles a couple years ago. But even last season, getting Mark Mitchell alone, that type of caliber of player, more often than not, you're not going to be able to lure away from the University of Duke or from Duke University, by the way. Obviously, the Cooper Flag situation was a fairly unique one, and Missouri was able to take advantage of it. But I think when it's not so much that Missouri decided to add Javon Porter, it was how early they did it in the process. I just wasn't a gigantic fan of the addition. And I think my point here is not to relitigate my Javon Porter feelings. I'm starting to get more optimistic, especially if he can actually play the center position. That's pretty interesting and opens up a lot of things offensively for Missouri in particular. But my main point here is that I think maybe I've let some of this sort of color my expectations a little bit, because as Missouri fans, of course, we want the Tigers to crush the portal as well as they ever have in every single cycle. Well, maybe realistically that wasn't just going to happen this season for whatever reason. But objectively, at least as objectively as we can here, when you look at things like Bart Torvik's projections for next season, well, Missouri right there at 25th. So a top 25, right on the edge there team. And when you look at other projection numbers and also other national writers, it sure seems like Missouri is almost always in the NCAA tournament. They're in pretty solidly the field of 68, not even necessarily on the bubble, but just like a solid, say, 6th, 7th place team in the SEC, which obviously when the conference got 14 in last year, that was easily within the conference, within the national tournament. I don't think that's going to happen this season, of course. I don't think the SEC is going to get 14 in, but if the Tigers are indeed the sixth best team in the conference, as again, the Torvik projections are saying, well, that's easily, and I mean easily, an NCAA tournament team and a team that isn't all that much different than last year's Missouri Tigers. So, of course, none of this means that the Tigers are actually going to be good. The games have to be played. And in fact, the projections liked a couple seasons ago when the Tigers went 0-19 in the SEC, you know what? The projections liked them quite a bit more than that too. So I understand. Take it all with a grain of salt. I'm not saying any of this is a guarantee of anything, but once again, I am fascinated that Missouri, which is not exactly at the tip of anybody's tongue nationally when it comes to talking about college basketball the last decade or so, it's just fascinating to me that the nation at large is so much more optimistic about Mizzou basketball for the upcoming season than its own fans are. I'm not sure I've ever really seen that be the case, and I don't totally know what is doing that. But regardless, hey, thanks so much for joining me on the Locked On Mizzou podcast today. Obviously look and sound a little bit different here, but once again, when I'm away from my home office, I still love to get some pods in for you. So thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen. For your second listen, check out the portal with the Scoutmaster, Brian Smith, the latest rumors, portal entries, signings. Be the most informed fan of college football by finding the portal on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. So until next time, I'm John Miller. This has been Locked On Mizzou.